This is a WSFA TV News special report. Annexation, an explanation.
On January 23rd, the citizens of Montgomery and Montgomery County will vote on an annexation proposal. The Planning and Development Department of the City of Montgomery says the annexation, if approved, would increase the geographic size of the city from almost 51 square miles to about 129 square miles. In addition, they say the population of the city would increase by approximately 18,000 to a total of 172,000. Most of the annexation would take place to the south, west, and east. It would also smooth out the present uneven boundary lines of the city. The process of annexation began in the Alabama legislature as the Greater Montgomery Act. In that body, the basic provisions of the annexation were altered somewhat to meet the particular wishes of some of the local legislators. The bill passed the House and Senate, which authorized the annexation after a vote by the people affected. One concern in preparing the annexation was how it would alter the black population of the city. According to figures compiled by Auburn University, the present city limits contain a black population of about 34%. A study conducted by the Department of Planning of neighborhoods in the annexation area shows that these additions will increase the percentage of black population by about 0.5%. Still, the measure adopted by the last session of the Alabama legislature is designed so that the desires of black citizens will not be diluted. So on January 23rd, when the polls open, there will be 4 elections in one, with the possibility that all 78 square miles will be added, none of it, or any third. The main proponent of the annexation proposal is Montgomery's Mayor Emery Fulmer. He says the expansion of the city limits will help in many ways to solve some present and future problems.
We have, as you can see, just a patchwork of annexations in the past, and as a result, we don't have the total responsibility and control of many of the drainage structures that we've got in the city. And I think the annexation that we're proposing will address itself to many of those problems.
Columbia, South Carolina is very much like Montgomery in many ways. It is the state capital and in the center of a growing urban area. For various reasons, Columbia has not been able to do much large-scale annexation, if any at all. A former mayor, city planners, present city administration, and businessmen give their perspectives on the problems that have evolved.
I am confident that we're going to have annexation or consolidation or some way to have many people that use the facilities of the municipalities to help defray the expenses of that municipality. I have always been in favor of annexation. Where the people, it's a fair thing. If the people outside want to come in, they vote to come in, and if the people inside want to accept them, they vote to accept them, or vice versa. So they can vote not to come in. But I thought all along that this was a proper way, and of course we back in the 70s, early 70s, we had a consolidation vote in Richland County, and it failed by only a small margin, a couple thousand votes. The people in the city limits who stood to lose maybe voted for consolidation, but the people outside did not.
I think it's a good thing to annex into the city. It broadens the tax base. It enables a lot of the city services to come to people that otherwise would not be able to get these services. From the standpoint of water, fire protection, police protection, and other health, storm drains, that sort of thing.
If Columbia, for instance, was able to annex areas before they developed, use the resources of their, for instance, water and sewer revenues to provide water and sewer in other areas of a size that would allow for commercial and industrial development, and, for instance, plan their drainage systems to provide for a larger area than just within the limited city boundaries they now have, I think a great deal of economy could have been realized that can't be without a single entity to implement some of these things.
Well, I think that a city should be able to annex the contiguous territory because it is all urban in character and therefore needs urban services. The people who live in the area use the facilities of the central city and pay no taxes toward the support of those facilities. It seems to me that a city should be able to expand its boundaries at will when an area is certainly urban in character. North Carolina has something similar to that the city council can determine the character of the area, and if it meets certain criteria as established by the state legislature, then they can annex it if they have a plan for extending city services at the same time.
What about the tax base? If they don't annex, they don't have that much of a tax base. Is this detrimental to the city?
I would think so, yes, that it could be detrimental to the city. Here again, depending on, in Columbia, I think that our tax base is pretty strong. But here again, I'm not that familiar with the revenues of the city and exactly how they are gotten, other than just through the real estate tax here.
What do you think the overall effects are on a city like Columbia to be unable to annex needed areas around for growth?
Oh, I think it's definitely stymieing the growth a little bit, particularly in the city. We've been very unsuccessful in getting any new business in the city limits. In fact, we are right now in the city limits of Columbia. There's no vacant land for anybody to build on. The city cannot grow. It's just stymied at this position. I think without annexation, any city will just die on the vine, because you're going to have to grow and expand if you want to stay in, as true in business as well as in government.
As far as annexation goes, does the government or politics or state laws get in the way sometimes?
Usually. Right now, state law is very cumbersome as far as annexation goes.
What problems have come up because of a lack of annexation?
Well, as you know, we're no different from any other city in that people are moving from the central city to the suburbs, and therefore our population has not increased at all. In fact, we feel certain has declined somewhat since the 1970 census. And with a declining population, you also have a declining tax base, which means that the people that are left there, of course, must bear a greater portion of the burden in order to supply services for everyone. And we, as I guess as Montgomery, have a lot of non-taxable property within our city. We had a survey done in '75 which indicated that some 46% of the property value within the city of Columbia was non-taxable. About 25% of that is state property. It's the state capitol, the University of South Carolina, and all the attendant state government offices.
In addition to the problems faced by Columbia because of a lack of annexation, there are other smaller cities that have incorporated around the city. Across the river in the next county are the incorporated areas of West Columbia, Casey, and Springdale. But most of the urban growth is to the north and east. Here lie the cities of Arcadia Lakes and Forest Acres. Most have developed their own police departments and other departments to provide city services. Directly to the east of Columbia is Fort Jackson. Even though the Army base is a part of the city, it still cuts off growth. The ringing of the city by incorporated areas has removed annexation expansion from the circle of possibilities. In Alabama, the city of Birmingham is facing the reality of being locked in by incorporations surrounding it. Unlike Columbia, South Carolina, Huntsville, Alabama has had a great deal of success in its annexation efforts. Tom Dozier, the director of Huntsville's Planning Commission, says they did most of their annexation in the 1960s.
The city of Huntsville, since January 1950, has annexed over nearly 110 square miles. We were right at 4 square miles in 1950, and today our city limits contains about 113.5 square miles.
When did most of this annexation come?
This is most of our annexation. It occurred in little bits and pieces since 1950, but the majority of our annexation took place between the years of 1960 and 1966.
What was the method behind this? How did you initiate the annexation?
Right. Mainly it was done by vote of the people in the area that was to be annexed into the city. We, at the time, the only two ways the city had to annex, that was by legislative action or by vote of the people who lived in the area. During that period of time, we annexed some 55 square miles into the city limits.
You mentioned that most of it up until that point had been kind of smaller piecemeal sections. What was the reasoning behind this larger annexation at the time, the 19 square miles at a time, 13 square miles at a time?
Well, as you know, Huntsville was, with NASA and the Army and the Redstone Arsenal and the George Marshall Space Flight Center, was experiencing a tremendous amount of growth during these years. And this growth not only was taking place inside the city limits, but was taking place adjacent to and outside the city limits. And to maintain an orderly pattern of growth with zoning, subdivision regulations, utility expansion, the expansion of sewer systems, this property needed to be in the city limits. There was several other major considerations to this type of annexation, of course, and that being that the city of Huntsville itself had to provide the fire and police protection to these new residents and new people moving into our area.
What was the method or the reasoning then for the larger annexation, knowing that one day the growth was going to slow down, especially with the aerospace industry?
One of the reasons, of course, was to maintain our tax base, to maintain a base by which the ad valorem taxes that we collect in the city come in, was to annex more land than was being developed at that time in order to, of course, we didn't know where the growth was going to stop, Dennis. We were in a panic growth situation. We were scrambling like we were on the top of a balloon and somebody was blowing it up. We were growing at 25 houses a day, 44 people a week, 9 classrooms a week, 100,000 square feet of commercial square footage a week. And it was just something that we didn't know where it was going to stop. We realized that it was, but we annexed beyond our needs in order to maintain a tax base and in order to provide essential services to areas as they grew and, of course, to, by our regulations, control that growth or have some say-so in what type of growth took place.
Of course, the boom growth in Huntsville has slowed down somewhat. What advantages have you realized with this extra annexation you did earlier in light of controlling the more steady growth that you have now?
All right. The advantage that we have enjoyed is the lack of other small municipalities having cropped up around the city limits to choke our growth and to keep our continuing steady growth from dying. It has maintained a very sound tax base within the city. It has opened up areas in the perimeter of the area for instance, our new jetplex has grew up in one of the areas that we annexed back in the 60s. And it has maintained our planning has been able to maintain itself since the late 60s on a long-range basis. During the 60s and when all the growth was taking place, we were playing catch-up. By the time we get a plan finished, well, we annexed something else and we had to expand our planning out into that particular area.
Have there been any disadvantages with annexing all this land over the last years?
Well, it would be futile for me to say there wasn't, Dennis. Yes, there is. Huntsville, of course, with all of this vast area that we've annexed and the vast development that has taken place, is a classic example of what planners call an urban sprawl. Not having time to build up into the air, we build out on the ground, and therefore we are spread out. And one of the this makes it very difficult for the city to supply vital services into urban sprawl. In other words, it stretches like a rubber band. It stretches your services. Your police now covering not only the city limits but the police jurisdiction, many more square miles. Your fire protection now is spread out to where the stations are further apart, and as they back each other up, the run time between station lengthens. Your water lines, your sewer lines, all of your necessary utilities begin to be stretched out. Now, instead of one treatment plant, for instance, in sewage, for sewage treatment, we have 2, 3, 4, and going to build another one, you see. So it stretches your vital services. Your garbage trucks now, instead of running 30, are running 60 miles. And this equipment costs money, but it maintains a country-type atmosphere which our citizens enjoy and like.
The annexation issue for the city of Montgomery has many far-ranging implications. Not only is the voting procedure complicated, but also the effects the annexation will have on drainage projects, planning, and growth of the city. Mayor Fulmer says the city's past annexation has, for the most part, been piecemeal.
Well, before us here is a color-coded map showing every annexation of the city to the city of Montgomery since the original incorporation of the city of Montgomery, which is shown here in brown. The others are annexations that have taken place in the past. The only annexation that in the past that has been done, in my judgment, properly was the 1927 annexation, which was done under Mayor Gunter's administration, and it was a far-reaching annexation that gave the city the latitude to plan properly for drainage and for many of the benefits that we now enjoy in the city of Montgomery. But since that time, you see from these little color-coded annexation areas that it's been just a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit here with no real pattern to it. We have irregularities such as an area here bounded on all four sides by the city of Montgomery, yet outside the city limits. We have areas here outside of the eastern bypass, inside the city limits. This area outside the eastern bypass, inside the city limits. We have large areas in here inside the eastern bypass, yet outside the city limits. We have areas in here with deliberate areas left out of the city limits. We have an area here that you can see with a design of an area deliberately left out of the city limits. We have in this area out towards the airport, we have areas that are left outside the city limits. The airport itself is not in the city limits. We have, as you can see, just a patchwork of annexations in the past, and as a result, we don't have the total responsibility and control of many of the drainage structures that we've got in the city. And I think the annexation that we're proposing will address itself to many of those problems.
Mayor, the annexation election this month will be rather complicated. How are the votes broken down?
All right. Originally, the bill as proposed by Representative Barron, who sponsored the bill in the legislature, had the area indicated in the boundary of green as to either vote yes or no to come into the city of Montgomery, be annexed into the city. But in the final legislative process, amendments were added to the bill that makes 4 voting units. One, you have the city of Montgomery as it now exists, which is the red boundary line shown here, plus the balance of the county not in the proposed annexed area. That is 1 voting unit. If the city of Montgomery and the balance of the unannexed county vote yes, then it opens the door for 3 other elections, which all are taking place simultaneously on January the 23rd. If the city of Montgomery and the balance of the county vote no, then the issue is dead. So it is very important in my judgment that the city of Montgomery respond and vote yes on this bill, on this ratification of this bill, because it is important to the city as well as to the other areas. But this is 1 voting unit with the balance of the county. Then if the city votes yes, then there are 3 simultaneous elections taking place. West Montgomery, west area, which is from a line about Hunter Station to I-85. Then a southern group from I-85 eastward to the Troy Highway. Then the 3rd group is from the Troy Highway up to an area just north of the northern bypass. Now, each of these groups can vote yes or no as to whether to come in the city or remain outside of the city. In my opinion, it would have been better to have had it all or nothing, but in the legislative process, it was amended to have these voting units in it.
It is then possible, if the city and the unaffected county votes yes, that we could have one of three different amounts of annexation, or several combinations.
That's the fallacy of this bill as it was passed, although I was delighted to get it passed because I think the issue is the most important issue that we have faced or will face in a long time. But it could conceivably be that the city and the balance of the county would vote yes, and all three of them would vote no. Or one would vote yes and others would vote no. Or all three would vote yes, as I certainly hope they will. But as far as the mechanics of the election, the city must vote yes for any of these votes to count. This overlay over the map of the city of Montgomery and the proposed area, annexed area, first of all shows the water lines or the proposed water lines that will be in the proposed annexed area. The Water and Sewer Board of the City of Montgomery is a very far-sighted group of individuals, and they recognize that Montgomery is growing, and they have been strengthening their capacity for water and the treatment of sewage. And they assure me that they will have adequate water lines and sewer lines. Sewer lines are those shown on this map, that the trunk lines that will serve these proposed annexed areas are either in place, underway, or should be in operation, some of them within 2 to 3 years. So they are making plans and are making the concrete plans to go ahead and get this in being. And I think it is very far-sighted on the part of the Water and Sewer Board to move ahead in this manner.
What would be the schedule then? Say the annexation goes through, then the areas that are annexed, of course, being in the city, then they would start paying property taxes. In some cases, when they did not have the sewer services and the water, what is the timetable on that?
All right, first of all, if the bill is ratified on January the 23rd, 1979, it becomes effective January the 1st, 1980, which gives us time to make some plans, detailed plans in each of these areas. But the city tax in the proposed annexed area would not be levied on any piece of property until that piece of property has all of the basic city services, such as water, sewer, police protection, fire plugs, street lights, and maintenance of the streets. So there would be no tax on any area that did not have the availability of sanitary sewer or water or any of these other services. But what this would do was bring these people into a full citizenship in the city of Montgomery, and then there are areas that are almost immediately ready for the full services. I'll give you an example. English Village in South Lawn. Excuse me. We're already providing police and fire protection in this area. These areas, we would be able to give them full city services almost within the year, by the time that the bill would become effective. We could put the street lights and the fire plugs, arrange the garbage pickup, etc., in this area within a short period of time. There are areas in this area off the Troy Highway and the Virginia Loop Road that have all the facilities except the garbage pickup and some street lights and things like that. So we could move in those areas right away. Now there are areas out here that in the eastern section that will be 2, 3, possibly 5 years before they have the availability of sanitary sewer. So they would not be taxed. And the law permits us to phase line services out as our budget, the city of Montgomery's budget, will do it. And to make it fair, we would not impose the tax on the people in the annexed area until they had all the services.
Not everyone is in favor of the annexation. Many people we contacted were opposed to the annexation plan. However, only one would voice an opinion for this program. Tom Moody, a property owner in the proposed annexed area, says he is against anything that would increase the influence and the power of the government.
I'm opposed to the annexation of the property surrounding as proposed by the city.
Well, what are your reasons behind this?
Well, mainly because it brings on zoning, and zoning takes away the property rights of the individual without their agreement to it. And I'm against further expansion of government. Mainly I'm against government because they don't know when to stop. The taxation and everything about government is just getting bigger and bigger, and it's getting more complicated for the people. So I'm against expanding the city because that makes a bigger city, gives you more government and more government control. And I personally am just tired of government control.
Or do these areas that are right now unincorporated but highly developed, do they not need some sort of planned growth that zoning laws and incorporation would bring so that they just don't grow as they please?
Well, a perfect example. We've had zoning for 20 or 30 years, and you can look at the intersections now in Montgomery along the southern bypass, along the eastern bypass. You can look at the Woodley Road and Carter Hill Road intersection, and you can look at the Ann Street interchange, and there where government and zoning has worked against the traffic conditions, the government goes out and zones residential property to commercial property. They don't increase the size of the streets. There's no way for you to get off the I-85 now at Ann Street without waiting, and in 10 years the traffic on Ann Street will be backed up to I-65. So the zoning, all they do is go out and zone everything around every interchange commercial so they can block the traffic. The traffic in Montgomery is blocked everywhere, and it's done mainly by zoning.
Some citizens who live in the proposed annexed areas are concerned with the approval of the measure will come increased cost. Critics say the additional property and other taxes they will begin paying to the city will be more than the reduction in charges they now pay for services such as water, sewer, garbage pickup, and home fire insurance.
The people will have a choice on Tuesday when they go to the polls. The annexation question is a very complex one. If approved, the city of Montgomery could add more than 78 square miles, more than doubling its geographical size, or add any combination of the three proposed areas. The population, if all three areas were added, would increase by about 18,000. The population density per square mile would go from 3,025 to 1,377. The actual annexation would take place on January 1st, 1980. The areas to be brought into the city would not be assessed taxes for city services until those services are provided. Some outlying areas might not go on the tax rolls for several years. City planners say there is evidence of a trend of urban sprawl in the Montgomery area. They say if this trend continues, Montgomery will experience a net loss of population in the near future. Opponents say annexation would actually increase the amount residents and businesses pay through taxes and charges for services. Still others are against the measure because they do not wish to see a bureaucracy get any larger. The decision on the annexation question is extremely important. Help make that decision by casting your vote on January 23rd. I'm Dennis Latham.
Annexation and Explanation has been a presentation of WSFA TV News. Any questions raised by this program may be answered tomorrow night at 7 here on TV 12 as we present Annexation, Your Questions Answered. Mayor Emery Fulmer will be here to answer your phoned-in questions live beginning at 7 p.m. tomorrow here on TV 12.